Week 1 of Introduction to Psychology and Psychological Counseling from a Christian Perspective. First, we learn about Franz Joseph Gall, a renowned neurologist and psychologist who was a pioneer in the study of the localization of mental functions in the brain. Franz Gall was revolutionary in his concept of the brain localization. Gall offended many religious leaders and scientists alike. The church considered his theories to be contrary to religion, that the mind created by God should be a physical seat in the brain matter. He established science also being condemned due to his many reasonings, including the fact that he could not provide real scientific proof of his theories. Gall very wisely submitted his stupendous research on the anatomy of the brain, which was really world class in its attempt to show more controversial work of the cerebral organs of the mind. The Academy asked his leadership in brain psychology. Pierre Flourens carried many of his experiments on animals, and uncertain whether Gall's preological insertions were true, despite the fact that they had been put to the test. He denied entrance to the rolls of the Academy, but Flourens liked the idea and started experiencing them in many research of his own. Philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was one of the creators of German idealism. He explored how, though much contradictory, his approach to the integrated whole. Hegel taught at Heidelberg University in Berlin. Building on Immanuel Kant's transcendent idealism, he developed elaborate systems of philosophy and psychology, but many government and religious organizations spoke against him. Ultimately, Hegel's philosophy was rejected. Kant's and other popular theories, the phenomenology of spirit, which was intended to be part, was incomprehensible and unscientifical. Unlike thinkers of Aristotle, the method set a set of principles which were becoming data points informing the whole mind. Eric Johnson said that there were two factors of modern psychology to become enormously and influential in our culture and in the church. Modern psychology has largely been devoid by religious organizations. Few opportunities have arisen for Christians to create dialogues and public differences in the value of psychology. Generally, Christians ignore or do not get involved in many psychological studies. Christian thinkers over the centuries have thought deeply about psychology matters and therefore never spoke as they arose. Christian interest in psychology has exploded over the last 50 years. Many countless books have been written. Dysfunctional development and relational problems have come about in the church, as many children are being raised by single parents or unwed mothers. However, the midst of this explosion, has been a matter of wrestling amongst the church. The Christian perspective on human life has been greatly needed to be discussed. Since the modern psychology academic has been largely secular, the disagreement of many churches have become absorbed or transformed by the way Christians think of human beings. Some Christians argue that any interpretation of modern psychology is poisonous. We ought to begin noting that Christians have commonly understood that the natural order is the work of the Creator to guide the process in rational and investigated thought. Throughout history, Christian Science has been fundamentally thought as a gift of God. But we must understand that the foundations of modern psychology must be further investigated and understood in the church, as older psychology methods and philosophical theology is looked at. These methods must be reasoned out so we can learn the structure of human beings and the reason and sensation and motivational virtues and the vices of various ideals of human maturation. However, the contrast, although rigorous, reflects the Bible as of folk psychology or lay psychology. Since this does not constitute a systematic comprehension, we look at the New Testament as an intellectual contribution in psychological theorizing of Christians in the modern technology and understanding of the brain. In earlier times, Aquinas identified the best of Aquitanist and Aristotelianism traditions as influential body of psychological thought. He also looked at the habits and virtue and emotions of memory and the intellect. We also learn that it is worth understanding that these understandings of these two people drew heavily in their theological and psychological traditions. And then Plato and Aristotle were looked at in the early ages as Bernard Clairvaux, a theologian, and Don Scotus and Walter Hilton, and many others, as they look at this quasi-psychology and try and understand the scientific building of the brain, the consciousness, the soul, in the aspects of Christianity. Possibly the most significant Christian psychologist author in the Middle Ages was Søren Kierkegaard, who used the word psychology to describe the works he wrote in profound psychological works. Although many Christian thinkers considered him the father of modern psychology and existential psychology, many churches still felt a free will and determination to fully look into this matter. But as we research this, we see a broad, rich tradition of human understanding that is needed in the church. Late modern has its conflicts. Dominated by the Reformation, modernism can be broken into teachings of Locke and Kant. Also foster philosophical and positive ideas of realism, which can be dangerous to anti-Catholicism and Protestantism. Secularism, however, is influenced in many of these teachings, but the methods can be applied to the church with noble results. According to such criteria and ethical and methodological claims, human beings and God are knowledge, and the options have no place in science. That could not be any truer than to say that science has no place in religion. Religion and science should be one and the same. We see here that new psychology, which was in modern terms from 1930-1960, may be illicit, but as we look further into it, we see that this is no further from the truth, as many psychological truths can be applied to Christianity in a psychopathic and counseling way, has referencing God and supernatural events. Living in a culture still largely religious, some seculars thought that religion and natural phenomena were dangerous to itself, but a God-given creation and principles should acknowledge about human beings and their legitimate need for God. Christians also must admit that naturalistic evolution in mind is shaped merely by skeptical genetics, may not be part of the church, but taking these concepts, we can have a critical way of looking at the brain and devising more common and approachable ways of understanding the biological effects of the brain. We should also look at Christians should also look at a course of assumptions as the adult person becomes self-aware and free of moral understandings, and the mechanism of computing or organisms as they develop these promptable ideas. These abilities, if believed were universal, bestowed by the Creator, should be proponents of science and theology. When psychologists confine themselves to study human behavior, it is to be experimentally studied, merely restricted, and applied to the existence of the soul, and a theological approach to psychology, disciplining it with relational viewpoints of theology based on the Bible, and a psychological understanding of general conditions between them.